On January 11, 1996, the Miami Dolphins hired Jimmy Johnson to replace the legendary Don Shula, who retired. Johnson was coming to South Beach with an impressive resume that included back-to-back Super Bowl championships and a tremendous ability to evaluate talent. However, Johnson didn't have the success in Miami that he achieved when he was in Dallas. On the other hand, I wouldn't say it was a failure, as Johnson quickly put together one of the best defenses in the NFL, mainly through the NFL draft. But as for the offensive side of the ball, that would be a different story. For this video, I'm going to briefly take a look back at the Jimmy Johnson era in Miami and also explain why the high expectations were not met. So due to his success with the Cowboys, essentially Jimmy Johnson had the opportunity to choose whatever coaching job he wanted. In the Jimmy Johnson, A Football Life, Johnson revealed that he chose Miami because he wanted to live there and also because of the quarterback, Dan Marino. Miami had the best coaching candidate it could possibly get. In addition, Jimmy Johnson is perhaps the best ever at evaluating talent and maneuvering the NFL draft. So Jimmy Johnson has an idea of what he looks for and wants in a player. First, for the 1996 NFL draft, here are the players Johnson drafted. The main player that jumps out is Zach Thomas, who became a Hall of Fame linebacker as he was drafted in the 5th round. Other players mentioned is first rounder Daryl Gardner, who didn't achieve the accolades as some of the other players they'll talk about later on, but he was a big part of the Dolphins' D in the interior defensive line, along with Tim Bowens becoming a solid run stopper. Two more names I'm going to mention, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and fullback Stanley Pritchett. And with that said, Jimmy Johnson, he really wanted to run the ball, as he had this rookie tandem in the backfield in Abdul-Jabbar and Pritchett to try to get the ground game going Jimmy Johnson's way. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in his first 2 seasons, would rack up a lot of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, but his yards per carry wasn't too appealing. For the 1996 Miami Dolphins season, Jimmy Johnson would really begin to change the roster with his type of players, basically everywhere except with the quarterback, obviously, and the offensive line. The 1996 Miami Dolphins finished with an 8-8 record and would miss the playoffs. During the season, Dan Marino would miss 3 games with an ankle injury. 1996 would be the only season Johnson would miss the playoffs while coaching the Miami Dolphins. Enter the 1997 season, and here are Johnson's draft picks. Now, before I talk about the first round selection, I want to start with the defensive players. In rounds 2 and 3, awesome job by Johnson, drafting cornerback Sam Madison, who for a period was one of the best corners in the NFL. Then Johnson drafted defensive end Jason Taylor, who became a Hall of Famer. Also in the 3rd round, the Dolphins drafted the very underrated linebacker and Derek Rogers, who I was a big fan of. Outstanding selections in rounds 2 and 3. Now, as for the first round pick, Yatil Green, he was incredibly explosive, could get open deep, and also could run a variety of routes. The Dolphins really needed this type of a playmaker. Yes, they had O.J. McDuffie, who was Dan Marino's favorite target at this time, but he was a possession wide receiver. But anyways, the Dolphins really needed to be more explosive on offense. However, Green wound up having multiple knee injuries and wouldn't see action on the field until 1999, appearing in only 8 games in his NFL career with 18 receptions. So the 1997 Miami Dolphins had made it to the playoffs with a 9-7 record, but lost in the wildcard round to their division rivals, the New England Patriots, who were led by Pete Carroll. Okay, so Jimmy Johnson, he is drafted well on defense, but the offense is a much different story. As mentioned earlier, Johnson, he wanted to pound the rock, but the running game wasn't working as well as he would have liked with Abdul-Jabbar as his lead back. There would be a change in offense coordinators as Johnson wanted a simpler system to reduce mistakes and more of a physical presence and stay out of 3rd and longs. So for the 1998 NFL Draft, in the 1st round, Jimmy Johnson selected a speedster running back from Ole Miss and John Avery, hoping to solve the running game problem to go along with Abdul-Jabbar. I also want to mention that previously Miami, they even tried to give troubled running back Lawrence Phillips attempts in 1997, but Johnson wanted to give Avery a shot. However, he would not be the answer. For me, I remember Avery much more from his time in the XFL in 2001, and remembering being so shocked that Avery was out of the NFL so quickly. But back to the 1998 NFL Draft, Johnson, he did draft an impact player in cornerback Patrick Surtain, as Madison and Surtain would become perhaps the best cornerback tandem in the NFL in the early 2000s. Also worth mentioning, Johnson, he drafted defensive end Kenny Mixon, who is not the impact player on defense as the other names I've mentioned, but nonetheless, Mixon, he'd be a starter for 3 of his 4 seasons in Miami. For Furthermore, the Dolphins, they signed safety Brock Marion, who became 3-time Pro Bowler with Miami. Now Johnson, he knew Marion well as he drafted the Nevada product in the 7th round in 1993 while Johnson was with Dallas. And that secondary Johnson put together was so good, perhaps the best in the NFL. Lastly, with Yatil Green not able to be healthy, Miami really needed another wide receiver to help complement O.J. McDuffie. Thus, the Dolphins, they signed Rondé Gadsden from the Arena Football League, and he became a solid receiver, but was not explosive with a route runner like Yatil Green, but had some huge hands and made some incredible catches. The 1998 Miami Dolphins, they finished with a 10-6 record, another playoff berth. As a defense, they allowed the fewest points in the NFL this season. This time, the Dolphins, they did win a playoff game in an entertaining postseason game against the Bills, but then got blown out by the eventual Super Bowl champs, the Denver Broncos. The window for Johnson and Marino to win a championship together is closing. So before I get to Johnson's last season with his last draft with the Dolphins, of course, there is a major item that needs to be mentioned, and that is the relationship with Dan Marino. Although Dan Marino was in the twilight of his NFL career, it was one of the reasons why Johnson wanted to coach in Miami. However, the relationship wasn't so smooth. While playing for Don Shula, I would say Marino had more freedom as opposed to playing for Jimmy Johnson. Supposedly, Johnson restricted Marino's ability to call audibles. Moreover, Johnson was and wanted to be a run-first offense, which is not what Marino was used to. He obviously wanted to air it out. Furthermore, Johnson was known for his very authoritative approach, doing things his way. The relationship between Johnson and Marino was labeled as being strained and rocky, as very few would disagree with that. So, there's going to be one more season with Johnson and Marino together. What I should mention is that after the 1998 NFL season, Johnson, he was close to retiring. During his time with the Dolphins, Jimmy Johnson's mother passed away, which resulted in Johnson viewing life in a different way. Instead, Johnson, he would come back for the 99 season and would hire his friend Dave Wanstead. Later on, Wanstead, he would take over for Johnson to be the head coach. So first, for the 1999 NFL Draft, Johnson, he didn't have a first-round selection, but desperate to get the running game going, Johnson drafted 3 running backs with his first 4 picks, as you can see. So there's Rob Conrad, who is more of a fullback and would wind up being a solid fullback in the NFL. Then there's Cecil Collins, who had a lot of talent, but he had off-the-field issues. And then there's Miami's first selection of the 1999 NFL Draft, which was J.J. Johnson, which I barely remember, and he wanted to be the answer to get the ground game going. 1999, the final year for Jimmy Johnson and Dan Marino together. The Dolphins, they finished with a 9-7 record, won a playoff game against Seattle, but then in the divisional round, such a surprising outcome as Jacksonville just destroyed Miami, 62-7. This was incredible, and this would be the final game for the Hall of Fame careers of Jimmy Johnson and Dan Marino. Obviously, Jimmy Johnson didn't have the success in Miami like he did in Dallas. But I wouldn't say it was necessarily a failure. He did quickly build one of the best defenses in the NFL, mainly through the draft. The impactful names he drafted were not first rounders. These impactful names were players like Zach Thomas, Jason Taylor, Sam Madison, Patrick Surtain, and Derek Rogers. Only Daryl Gardner was a first rounder. But during the subsequent Dave Wanstead years, the Dolphins defense that was built by Jimmy Johnson was one of the best in the NFL. During this period, you could win with a strong defense, a running game, and a game manager as quarterback. The run game didn't improve with Lamar Smith and Ricky Williams during the Dave Wanstead era. In 2000 and 2001, the Dolphins, they had a couple of 11-5 seasons, with their strength being their defense, with Jay Fiedler as a quarterback. The 11 wins and 5 losses was their best record since 1992. The Dolphins made the playoffs both years, but only recorded 1 postseason win. Then Miami would go 9-7 and 10-6. But they were not able to make the playoffs those 2 years. In fact, Miami wouldn't make the postseason again until 2008. Thank you so much for all the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support, and thank you once again for watching this video.